Numbers you see there in that report by Michael Appel are set to increase sharply if we are to go by what the Minister of Health has been telling us, that they want to ramp up the testing for COVID-19 to thousands per day. And that's going to be key, because one of the factors I did see in some of the countries that have dealt with this situation in the weeks before it hit South Africa was testing was absolutely crucial where it is necessitated by symptoms. And you need to be testing as many people as possible who display symptoms. To this now, and the cruise ship MSC Orchestra has returned to Durban from Mozambique. The Transport Minister Fikile Mbalula said earlier this week it would be treated as a quarantined vessel in terms of the COVID-19 regulations. ETV reporter Nabila Sheikh joins me now from our Durban studios with the latest. So tell me, Nabila, about the return of the MSC Orchestra. It left under controversial circumstances just before the ban on vessels leaving South African ports, cruise vessels leaving South African ports. There was a lot of talk about how it would be treated. What were the circumstances then upon its return?
Good afternoon to Lasizwe. Well, it left at a time when there was a lot of uncertainty as to how these vessels are going to be handled. But following its return, it docked early this morning at the port of Durban. There were quite stringent measures to ensure that all of the more than 2,400 passengers had been checked correctly, in that they had been screened, temperature checks had been done. They also had to fill out health clearance forms. And when we spoke to the South African Maritime Authority this afternoon, they held a briefing just to say that all of the passengers have been cleared. None of the passengers have showed any symptoms or high temperatures. And they are now in the process of actually assisting with the crew members. There are 900 crew members who were also on board that ship, and they are disembarking as we speak.
But that's quite a stretch from what Fikile Mbalula was talking about a few days ago, treating the entire vessel as a quarantined vessel. If you're saying that there was screening of the passengers, I'm not hearing the word quarantine anywhere there. What are port authorities saying about that?
Indeed. They said that there's no reason for these passengers to be quarantined because all of them are South African citizens, except for a few of the passengers who are from the SADC region. There were a few passengers on board from Botswana and Zimbabwe, but they believe that because none of the passengers have actually shown any symptoms, in that case, they would have asked them to go into a compulsory 14-day quarantine. But they say that there was actually a big operation just to ensure that the disembarkation can take place properly, in that the passengers were let off the ship in groups of 100 at a time so that they can actually follow the regulations. But the minister did say earlier this week that it was unfortunate that the ship had left under the circumstances that it did. And even just speaking to some of the passengers today, it seems as though they gave a sense of being deceived, because on Monday, when they had checked in with MSC, they thought that everything was fine. But obviously, with the new regulations, things had taken a turn. So for them, they weren't even allowed to get out of the vessel when they were in Mozambican waters. So they didn't leave the ship at all, and that is why the South African Maritime Authority says that they believe it's safe at this stage to let them go.
Lastly, Nabila, is anyone talking consequences for this in terms of this ship leaving our shores under the circumstances where there was that uncertainty, but also is anyone talking about how to make sure that this doesn't happen again?
Well, according to the South African Maritime Authority, they say that because of the timing of all of this, it was very unclear. As it stands, no cruise ships will actually be allowed in any of our ports going further. But this was a special case in that the president had made the announcements on Sunday night, and they had disembarked early on Monday, and they could not make arrangements at the 11th hour, and that's the only reason, because of the uncertainty. MSC told us at the time that they were trying to get answers from the presidency as well as the office of the premier with regards to how they would handle the situation, and they were allowed to actually leave the port of Durban because of the uncertainty. But as it stands going forward, no cruise ships will be allowed into the port of Durban.
Nabila Sheikh, thank you so much for that update. That's ETV News' Nabila Sheikh there, giving us an update about the return of the MSC Orchestra vessel from Mozambique coming back to our shores under that situation, of course, now that there's been a cancellation of all cruise ships.